My name is Lloyd Tullues. I head up the engineering team at Carbonated. And when I was invited to come speak here at Dev.Play, there were a number of topics that I could talk about that I get really excited about, right? Machine learning, graphics, network, and so on. But I ended up settling on a topic that I instill repeatedly and incessantly in my studio, and that is of turning people into robots. But before I get into that, a little bit more background on me. Oh, there you go. Who is this guy? As was said, I've been in this industry for more than 15 years, depending on where you start counting. And I'm a generalist engineer, so I enjoy practically everything about game development. I get really excited about new technologies, new areas of gameplay, and so on. I've done graphics engineering, networking, gameplay systems, low-level systems, high-level systems, porting, and quite a bit of tools development. A little bit of a segue. I particularly like porting games, mainly because I really love digging into other people's code that they no longer support and trying to figure out how they put their games together, trying to make the sense of it all and make it run better on platforms that they're not necessarily intended for. But even though I've had my fingers into so many pies, that was interesting. All right. There was not a participant that wanted to be part of that. I've had my fingers in so many pies over the past decade and a half. But what I found was that I kept coming back to tools and technologies over and over again, not just to make my life easier, but also those of my team members, the folks around me, the folks that are in the trenches working on making games better. To that effect, I started a company about 7 years ago creating UI middleware with a tool and whatnot. I spent an incredible amount of time focusing on the authoring environment because I knew that that's what people wanted to spend their time on, creating UIs in a sort of a visual way. And a good amount of the work was also spent in the library, but that was kept light and fluffy and whatnot. The company ultimately didn't go anywhere, but I learned an incredible amount of information and lessons about how people want to work, right, and how to instill that into my engineering teams going forward. And it wasn't really until I served as a global technical director for Electronic Arts that the importance of tools and technologies really took shape in my mind. I looked at all of the best studios across the world under EA, and I noticed the best studios all had the best tools to support their development processes, all the way from pre-production through production, launch, and finally live services. And so I adopted this idea from EA about turning people into robots and really solidified it in my mind. And by robots, I of course mean as a metaphor for the automation of your development processes. Now, in preparation for this topic, I realize it's a bit of a tricky one. Got a lot of very interesting feedback, controversial feedback, as I was telling people about it. And a couple of things really came up repeatedly. And one was that we've all seen images of robots literally replacing people in manufacturing jobs, like car manufacturing and so on. And nobody really wants that. There's a strong implication that my job is so easy that a machine can do it, right? That sucks. So what's there to be said about creativity and problem solving? Where's the human factor in my job? And going hand in hand with that was a sort of an engineering arrogance, right? How dare some engineer think that he can do, he knows my job so well that he can implement algorithms and programs to do it better. So my goal today is to convince you all that it is in your best interest to turn yourselves and have your team turn themselves into robots as a way to empower them, empower you through your career and through the success of your studio. But of course, we come back to our jobs, and what about them, right? This is a theme that I'll keep coming back to is that turning people into robots is ultimately about people, right, and empowering them. You want to free up your people, your team, to pursue new roles, new projects within your company, or just straight up creating higher quality work. What can you imagine for a second, right? Game development is always intense. You're always down to the wire. What can you do with extra time on your hand, right? I like to think in bad analogies. They're a lot of fun to make. Gets a lot of chuckles. And the one that I am kind of stuck on at this moment in time is, think of your team, your artists and designers, QA folks, producers, and so on, as corvettes stuck in sand, right? You've got these amazing machines. They're beautiful, they're fast, whatnot, but they're held back by external forces. So what do you do in that case? Well, the solution's obvious. Get them out of sand. Build roads, right? Invest in what you have and really make them soar. But of course, sometimes it actually happens, right? You automate somebody's job, somebody's role, and for some reason they can't transition, right? They can't adapt to a different role or whatever. When that happens, good luck to you. You have a hard conversation to have. But suffice to say, don't forego automation just to save a job. In fact, automation in the end may end up saving it. I pulled a couple of quotes from a few articles online. And the first one I like, has anyone seen a distinct decline in accountants in the world out there? No, nobody? That's because spreadsheets never kill the accountant, right? They made them better. They made them more efficient. They made them accessible to folks like you and me. All the user error that pen and paper accountants saw back in the day is by and large eliminated by automation. And by automation, I mean computer programs, things that calculate things for you. The second quote is also an interesting one. There's a perception sometimes that there's a finite amount of work that's available and that automation will take that away from you, and then where are you? Well, it's not exactly true. What it does is it enables, again, your people, your team to adapt into new roles and new abilities, new projects, and so on. There's a good there's a good sort of a mental exercise if you want to think about it. Think back to the old storage utility, storage warehouses back in the day before forklifts came around, right? You had 5 men, burly men, moving around these giant boxes that weighed a ton or freight or whatever. In comes a forklift, replacing the work of 5 men down to 1 that can drive a forklift. Well, what about the other 4? Well, as the storage facility was able to move more packages and freight and whatnot, so were their operations leaner and faster and more efficient. They were able to open up more storage facilities, so the other 4 guys that were out of a job are now forklift drivers. So the labor-intensive industries aren't necessarily excluded from these two quotes, even though they largely talk about the high-tech industries. But just like getting a forklift and buying it and getting it serviced and all that takes effort and cost and time on your part, why even do it? Again, starts with people. Everything about automation ultimately comes down to people and empowering them. When you take care of your team and you free up their time to do better work, through reducing their repetition, reducing user error, so that they solve problems once and produce correct content the first time around, and also eliminating dead time. Quick question: how many of you all engineers, QA artists spend time watching little bars grow all the time through compilation of code, or exporting of assets, or rendering cutscenes? Right? I spend a gross amount of my time doing exactly that, and I hate it. Watching little bars grow makes me entirely ineffective. So you reduce the time of your people, of your team spent doing null work, so to speak, and you free them up doing to make quality work. That flows directly into your game, right? With additional time, the question I asked earlier, what do you get? You get new content, better features, hardened systems, that extra bit of polish that sets your game apart from the others. And ultimately, you get to a point that I particularly enjoy, which is you are able to iterate on new game features. I've been on projects before where I simply could not find the fun or or make it as robust as I want to, because you're up against the clock and you have to hit it the first time right, and you hope you did it. That was my console experience days that I'm very glad I don't have to deal with anymore. Once your people, once your team and your game has been taken care of, your studio is better positioned to take advantage of change market situations, right? New business models or new transaction models that arise, new opportunities, right? A publisher comes to you and says, I have an IP, would you like to make a game for me? Well, if your team is tied up and your game is kind of tied up, then it's harder to jump on those opportunities. You're also able to adapt faster, right? So when a new platform arises and there's new languages that come out, you might have the engineering time available to dig into new technologies as they come up, like the previous presenter with Kubernetes containers and the ability to scale your infrastructure on the cloud. I love this quote at the bottom, and I repeat it quite often just to set a kind of a frame. Great tools make great games, but exceptional tools create blockbusters. I said that all wrong, but close enough. All right, move on. I have two examples of personal experience. Early on in my career, I worked on MLB 05 and 06. We had an interesting tool, or an interesting system for UI layout. Initially, it was hard-coded. Everything was hard-coded, from the initial layout to grabbing data, displaying, and so on. It took about 1 to 2 days per screen per engineer to lay out all those screens for a title that ships every year. I know this because I was that engineer. I spent a lot of time just getting coordinates correct. So we saw that this was a gross waste of time. We decided we're going to create a UI editor to build our flow for us by the artist the first time around. That saved a lot of time. And if you're familiar with the MLB franchise from 05 and 06, you'll see how it transitioned over those early days to what the hit that it is now. On the other side, one of the studios that I worked for created a similar tool, but on a greater scope, called the World Editor, and it was sort of an all-encompassing tool. It laid out maps, it built scripts for you in a custom language, triggers, cutscenes, and so on. It was custom built, fraught with errors, which is fine. All custom built tools are with errors and limitations. The difference was, though, that it had minimal to wavering support, whereas the MLB UI editing tool had continued support over the years. That resulted in an otherwise exceptional team, and I really love that team, being held back by technology that saw wavering support over time. The point here is that when you automate your processes, it's an ongoing process. You can't just solve a problem today and hope that's going to solve your issues down the line. It's an ongoing support problem, and you have to plan for that. So, if it's an ongoing problem and you have to start somewhere, how to do it? It starts with people. Everything starts with people. There's a culture shift that plays the most integral part of this, and that is to instill within your team that that you should always work yourself out of a job. I tell people this, they give me the stink eye, like, what are you talking about? I want to have a job. No, it's fine. Cool. Work yourself out of a job. Don't fear losing it. I tell people that I am by far the laziest engineer you'll ever meet, simply because I work exceptionally hard so that I don't have to work later. And in the past 15 years, I have not stopped working my butt off every day trying to get to that point. Ultimately, what happens is I solve a problem, that's great, and I go on to the next thing, like, new problem to solve. So when you work yourself out of a job, you'll never stop working. It's kind of interesting. And when you have that cultural shift of working yourself out of a job, you should start looking at what people are doing every day, what you're doing. right? Where are you spending most of your time? It could be small. It could be something small that just takes 5 minutes a shot every day, or sorry, 5 minutes a shot repeatedly throughout the day. Well, if you get a half an hour, 2 hours or so back, what can you spend that on? You should do the same for your team, right? Look at how they're doing. As engineers, we should constantly be solving not just for the for the problems that for the game for the tasks that we have at hand, but also solving for our studio, right? I'll say that I've mentioned this before again, that people are your greatest asset. And it is really true. Hands down, the greatest asset in your studio is your people in your team. So you should invest in them, right? And the best way, in my opinion, to invest in your team is through automation. So once you've identified some areas of improvement, you've got a couple choices to add automation to your studio. The first is buy. I'm a big fan of buying tools, right? Very simply said, don't build what you don't have to. Buy everything else. As I said over here, there's really not a whole lot you can do versus a professional team that develops professional tools. 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 52 days out of the year, right? So let them employ massive teams to build professional tools, and you get it for a fraction of the dev cost, and you get continued support. To kind of nail that point home, don't reinvent Jira, right? Trust me, it's a painful experience. You're always going to be lagging behind, and you're going to waste your development expertise. I like open source projects. We use quite a bit of them in my studio. The trick there is prefer active open source projects with vibrant communities. You can use an open source project that has gone stale or stagnant over the years, but understand the cost of that. If you find a bug or you find some issues or limitations, it's up to you to figure out how to fix it. And that may or may not be something that you have the ability to do. Build what you can buy, right? These are your game-specific tools or team-specific tools if you've got unique processes that set you apart. The trick here is to make them generic, right? As engineers, we sometimes have this habit of seeing a problem and coming up with the shortest, fastest solution to solve that problem. When you do that, over time, you risk amassing a grand number of tools that require more tools to maintain them, right? And you get to a point where you look at the 10, 20, 30 tools that are all fragmented and disjointed, and you go, man, I wish we had a little bit of foresight to fix these problems, so we got to scrap all of them and start all over again. So knowing you're going to do that, do it in the very beginning and solve that hard problem once. I didn't add it to the slide, but one thing I want to mention, oftentimes in studios, the tools engineers get a bit of the shaft, right? They're neglected, or they don't get all the attention that they need. I place an immense amount of pressure and importance onto my tools engineers. They are critical to my studio's success. So give them the power, give them the resources available to do their jobs well. Don't neglect them, and don't treat them like second-class citizens. It's a bit of a rant, it's a bit of a pet peeve of mine, knowing how important tools are. We would like to highlight a few tools that we like to use, where we've turned people into robots. Some of these are obvious, but they're worth pointing out. I would love to hear from you guys as to what you use in your development processes as well. Always want to find the best solutions out there to make the best games. A particular liking of mine is Jenkins. We use Jenkins for a lot of things, not just build management or continuous integration processes, but we also will use it to update analytics once in a while if it needs to be pulled from an interesting source that is out of bounds from our regular Redshift Tableau pipeline. We use it for load testing. If you're familiar with Jenkins, you know that if you can write a script for it in a bash shell, you can do magic with it. So I leverage Jenkins quite a bit. We like our Atlassian products quite a bit, specifically because of the cross-integration. Love creating Jira tickets out of Confluence and hooking them up into to Crucible. Then a couple of the others are kind of obvious, but I love, my particular favorite is Incredible. It's the closest thing that I have to literally turning people into robots, because I'm stealing CPU power from all my other engineers, all my artists and producers and QA folks, and sometimes the CEO, even though he doesn't know it yet. But I love that. I love, literally turning them into quote-unquote drones so that I can compile faster to the benefit to the other engineers as well. So coming full circle, the thing that I want to impart upon you all, which is counterintuitive, is that turning people into robots is fundamentally about people and empowering them to do, and I quote, the best work of their lives, right? When they do the best work of their lives, your game benefits. When your game benefits, your studio benefits. So please take this to heart. Go out, make great tools, employ great tools programmers, automate everything you possibly can. Focus your attention on your game, because I ultimately want to play cool games in my spare time as well. That is all I have. So thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Do we have time for questions?
Thank you for an awesome presentation. What I actually like or thought about myself a lot, that this kind of approach, you put it like in the form of like a CTO that's improving the tools and so on, but also I see more mundane tasking, any role which is out there. It doesn't matter if you're whatever business developer and need to write some emails or send, or you're a CEO and you're invoicing something onto you. I was just wondering that, in your studio, if you're trying to also kind of automate these like non-technical jobs, and if yes, that if it's your role or you have someone else to do the non-technical stuff.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I have a dedicated tools team. I have 2 tools engineers. Most studios have one engineer. I've got 2 because I put so much pressure and so much importance on my engineers. When we notice some inefficiency in our studio, or redundant tasks, repetitive tasks, or whatever, then it's a tools engineer that is the first sort of line of defense to figure out how to automate that, right? And it could be anything. It doesn't need to be a shell script or some custom written program. It could be as simple as saying, hey, producer type, I see you do a lot of calculations, elsewhere. How about I help you write an Excel macro that does it for you? You have a couple fields here and there, and knock out the results, right? I love Excel. It's interesting in that it is it can be used as a rapid prototyping tool for future programs. In that you can set up your general flow of data in Excel and see how it comes at the end. But yeah, ultimately it comes. My tools programmer is my first line defense. If somebody else can do it, or if it's a training mechanism, so I can train the producer to do it himself, then we would do that as well. But it's a cultural thing across, like I said, across the whole team, for everybody to constantly work on themselves to turn themselves into robots.